Who listens to the cry when the youths want respect? Everybody thinks that the youths deserve to have a say. How can you have a say when you don't have a voice? Last general election, they told us how much we have the right to vote. But who listens to the youths who think they have nothing to vote for? The youths in society are in crisis? Or tell me, is it that our society is in crisis and the youths pay the highest price? Am I, youth, a buzzword of development for your donor agencies? Or do you believe in the youths and reach out when I tell you that the youth do not want to be heard, they want power? We live the violence institutionally and in our individual lives. Not even our bad girl Riri Rihanna overseas was immune to such violence in her relationship like many youths right here. It is with great pleasure that I accept the opportunity to communicate with you on this well-timed event on Caribbean Youth Day. We celebrate the achievements of our heroes and reflect on what still needs to be done on the way ahead. As Rastafari guides me and my engagement with fellow sisters and brothers, I do not address you tonight. I am merely a voice of transition, speaking what is already silently resting in your hearts and introducing you to the colors, faces, and songs of my experience to your consciousness. The banner for Caribbean Youth Day 2015 is refocus, reinvest, and reinforce for a stronger and sustainable Caribbean. The scope of the Salisis Conference on Caribbean Youth Development attempts to fill the gap in scholarship as it brings forward the voices of young people to make this year's Youth Day more meaningful. And I have full confidence, Dr. Roberts, its aim will achieve this. However, I must inform you that the frameworks of my contributions tonight do not fit the noble intentions of the day nor the conference. For a post-2015 development agenda, these frameworks have tilted some of the developed world's resources in the north to the direction of the south. However, as buzzwords and smart talk, they have little significance to the youths whom I reason and break bread with. To the organizers who painstakingly played me out, as we would say in Trinidad, to come here with first-class hospitality in Jamaica since my arrival, I'm very sorry. I'm not the man for the job. You hear that? I hope my presentation tonight is of equal merit, however. My work is more interested in a contemplation of youths in the Caribbean, existentially and spiritually. This is in line with Rex Nettleford's challenge to us in inward stretch, outward reach, to produce new and appropriate ontologies, cosmologies, and epistemologies that can serve as a compass for charting the course into the third millennium and beyond. I will present 6 visions of reality that come forward for Caribbean youths today. The dream of a ministry of youth, the problem of conservatism and classism in the youth movement, how feminism free the youths, not just Rasta, liberate the people, organizing the youths, the Caribbeanization of consciousness, and finally, number 6, the case for youth studies and a youth movement. Think of this presentation as a musician ramaging on a steel pan. What may appear as a musical digression at first is really an enhancement of the score. This is the process of my reflections on a Caribbean that challenge itself to create imagined futures, a more integrated, independent, and introspective Caribbean youth generation. Ministers of youth come and go. It is oftentimes a political handout, ministry that does not give the legislative and budgetary priorities as would national security and finance. In Belize, you have a Ministry of Education, Youth and Sports. In Jamaica, you have a Ministry of Youth and Culture. In Grenada, you have a Ministry of Youth, Sports and Religious Affairs. What do they all have in common? Someone tell me. Youth and magic and development. The titles of ministries reflect the priorities and governance style of a ruling political regime. What this suggests is that the youth are to be accompanied by sporting and cultural activities. They are often seen as raw material talents that require state interventions for developmental of sport and cultural outputs. I believe the reality of youth is more complex than this, and this portfolio sharing approach oversimplifies the experience of youths and the scope of youth work required to properly integrate us into the development agenda. In my island, there was one attempt to recognize the youth in terms of psychosocial development, and a Ministry of Gender, Youth and Child Development was established. At the same time, in Trinidad and Tobago alone, the naming of the ministry where youth falls under has undergone a number of changes. Once the Ministry of Culture, Sport and Youth, then the Ministry of Sport, Youth, Culture and Creative Arts, then the Ministry of Sport and Youth, next the Ministry of Human Development, Youth and Culture. In 2010, the government created the Ministry of Youth, Child Development and Gender, and in the swaying of the new cabinet, some weeks ago, we reverted to the Ministry of Sports and Youth Affairs. Open the door to most of these ministries. Yes, they are one of the largest employers of youth in part-time contract work and on-the-job trainees. However, I must contend that this is a hardly imaginative reality. How can you have a Ministry of Youth when young public servants answer to directors in their 40s, a PS in his or her 50s, and ministers who have been blessed with the age of reaching 210? Lately, there has been a trend in the Anglophone Caribbean to now empower young politicians by allocating the ministries of youth to them in the cabinet. However, a titular change at the top that is not reflected in the wide-reaching structure is insufficient for the youths. I do not advocate fan ageism that turns on our elders and long-established youth work professionals. I instead hope to raise eyebrows by my questions. It would be absurd if only men ran a women's bureau, or equally absurd if Indigenous affairs in Guyana did not meaningfully have people who were Indigenous. Not so? We should have a young PS, young technocrats, young expertise at all levels, and not perpetuate an indictment on every university degree, regionally or overseas, that the education and skills training do not provide the youths with the necessary work experience to lead the sector in the public service that was meant to benefit them. Another growing problem is that youth and sports are closely associated and always evenly matched. This leads to more hyper-masculinist approaches to development. Tell me, in which Caribbean country does a Ministry of Youth and Sports attack violence among cricket and football teams, bad attitudes in sports, failing grades and indiscipline among athletes who underperform and are used for school pride, but suffer from post-secondary school shame? So yes, I argue for a special and important place for young people, a dedicated Ministry of Youth that specifically thinks about the nation and national development from the standpoint of young persons' lived experiences. At the same time, I argue for a consciousness of youth that spreads throughout the society, where older and elder women and men can safely guide us and build solidarity with our struggle for our ideas of justice and our ideals of humanity and dignity in a youth-led ministry dedicated to youth development. In my activist and professional experience, there are generally two types of youth groups: professional lobby groups, one that recruits largely tertiary educated youth from middle strata, and other recreational and social activity groups that attract lower class membership at the community level. Notably, this division is less apparent in youth political wings of major political parties in the region. Unattached youth who consciously or unconsciously advocate the causes of youth but are not formally involved in an organization, they can be found as spots in trade unions, boards of state enterprises, and civil society organizations that have long established histories nationally and regionally, including major charity organizations like the Rotary Club, for example. I now focus on the problem on conservatism and classism in the youth movement. Tell me, how many times do we open our meetings with a Christian prayer? Do we recognize religious diversity in our organizations? Why do we promote discourses that morally police us, such as positive and negative youth? What possibilities may exist if we discuss youth in terms of practices that are productive and unproductive? In our youth groups, and you know them, we claim to defend youth, but our prejudices do not support same-sex loving youths. We are wishy-washy on the views of reproductive rights and health. We are quick to wave the banner of abstinence, but are afraid to touch sex education. Those who find themselves on the progressive front of youth are often in a minority voice, like myself, and have far too little allies after all the strides in activism we have made. I once sat in a meeting in 2010. One member prayed against the devil that caused the earthquake in Haiti, dubbed the Haitian earthquake, as if the earthquake was born in Haiti. Immediately after, a conversation about voodoo ensued among the membership that only suggested further need to reform the education sector to teach us religious diversity and promote cultural literacy. I was born into a diverse religious family, but my mother's deep faith in the Roman Catholic Church introduced me to Christ first. As much respect as I have for the community of the faithful, I cannot forget my first day at Combermere School when the register read Christian name and last name. What about Ibrahim and Sunil, or even a non-believer with a Christian-inspired name? No religion is value-free, especially religions that become mixed with cultural practices that are steeped in prejudices established in colonialism. The Christian-based value system is not a problem by itself. Religious and ideological fundamentalism is. In Caribbean society, it is no surprise that religious conservatism exists across all echelons of society. In a real way, it may even serve to neutralize the idea of class conflict. However, my experiences among youths have exposed me to an array of classes attitudes that have a middle-class view of society and a politics of respectability. Most of us in this very room here this evening are distinguished alumni of great Caribbean secondary schools. What can speak more loudly for social capital at a glance than a secondary school ring? Youth leaders largely emerge from elite schools that have given them opportunities and resources to develop professionally and personally. High motivation environments that foster an internal locus of control put us not only in front of the class, but in front of government and the private sector. I am talking about the Presentation College, the QRC, Naparima Girls Bishop Anstey, Trinidad. I'm talking about the Queen's College, Combermere and Harrison's in Barbados, Queen's College and Bishop's High in Guyana, St. Mary's and St. Joseph Convent in St. Lucia, referred to the Immaculate Conception and Campion College in Jamaica. The inequality of opportunity, and dare I say a cultural apartheid, that permeates Caribbean society will further have youths in the thousands behind until we begin to challenge the unequal status of our schools and improve the resources that go into non-denominational and traditionally prestige schools in order to disrupt the old boys and old girls club that define our regional leadership. If you are born in the middle class, you cannot do anything about being automatically privileged by being born in the middle class, and nobody wanted to be born poor. However, more and more, I have observed growing classist fears and social gentrification in society that finds its way into civil society organizing. As a consequence, there's greater disunity among youth groups and an overemphasis on deeply individualistic and vanity-based politics of charity over a collectivist politics of justice. Simply put, if you and your youth group raise funds to make 100 sandwiches to distribute on one day of the week to 100 persons as part of your charity drive, do you ever think so far ahead, as Frank Ocean would sing, to consider what system do we live in that allows you to give 100 sandwiches on one day to a person who did not have one for a week? Bob Marley in Zimbabwe's song, "Soon we'll find out who is the real revolutionaries, and I don't want my people to be contrary." Amilcar Cabral, whom I was named after, on class suicide, explained that it was only possible to serve the people after examining the contradictions of one's own class. In Latin America, through deep internal debates within the church, a liberation theology was developed, and a concept of a preferential option for the poor defined the pastoral vocations. Too many times, I have seen youths afraid of poverty, and their resume and CV shows evidence to the contrary. They can list on pages upon pages how they have tried to fix it. You cannot be afraid of the poor. Those of us who are not afraid to continue the lifelong commitment of ending it, you are in the right place. Again, simply put, you cannot fear poverty if you seek to end it. The challenge, therefore, to the university-educated policy consultant, old boy or past pupil of the top secondary school, is to assess our privilege that allows us to ignore the reality of the mass of people and those in the margins. We should embrace opportunities beyond charity and work for social and economic justice in communities that are peripheralized and begin to understand the complexity in which ordinary, everyday, working, regular people and non-working youths experience disempowerment. In every media appearance, I am asked, and I'm sure many of you are asked sometime in your life, where are the youth? I reply, they are fighting in the front line, they are singing songs of freedom as we speak, they are on Facebook, maybe 2 hours instead of 20 minutes, and they are increasingly becoming more feminist. I probably wear F on my chest, not for fried bake, but for feminism. At this conference, the schedule has Theresa Best Downs as presenting a paper on the highly problematic and outdated legislation that raises the matters of consent in child marriage in Trinidad. Name the youth movement that has this as a flagship issue: feminism. Everywhere we read letters to the editor on male academic underachievement in schools. The Minister of Foreign Affairs in Bahamas at the St. Augustine Forum argued for us to declare a special commission on boys and men to address the plethora of male problems. But who understands that as boys underperform, so do girls? That the school system privileges one form of intelligence and not multiple intelligences. That failure rates among our youths, boys and girls, need special attention, or we will birth an illiterate, enumerate, and dysfunctional generation for the 21st century. Name the youth movement that has this as a flagship issue: feminism. Child abuse in the name of disciplining, that we know as the invisible war on children. Name the movement: feminism. HIV/AIDS, human trafficking of young girls, violence among young boys that lead them to suicide. Name the movement. Name the movement. I'm speaking here on my own 2 feet as a student and a research assistant at the IGDS, but more importantly, a Caribbean citizen. At the moment, in the Caribbean, there is no other political ideology continuing day to day, reaching lives in both an internationalist and rooted in radical critiques of social structures, no other than feminism. Today we have wider regional conversations through blogging by one of the greatest successes of this new generation of feminists, who are youth in the corners of the archipelago, such as Catch a Fire, Code Red, O Mantra, Diary of a Mothering Roker, to name a few. Many persons think they know what feminism is and are quick to dismiss it, with the gross misconceptions of its history and politics. I tell you, our name may be different, but the aim is the same. Feminism has been, and feminists are, advancing the cause of Caribbean youths, and they are the firebrand vanguard of the movement. Youth reject political parties' youth congresses because of a genuine distrust of politicians in general, and more specifically, a hostile environment to persons who express the political alliances publicly. Moreover, they reject the idea that they will be the cheerleader of a political party and have their work and aspirations relegated to cake sales, ushering party officials to their seats, and distributing bottles of water. Organizing youths have been difficult on 2 fronts. It is an interesting field for the cyber anthropologists. We have both online and offline activism, which has challenged the entire way we organize our social lives, communicate with the world, and manage information in the 21st century. It is now popular knowledge that the Arab Spring and protests in Baltimore, namely the Black Lives Matter campaign, use social media through their social and political justice struggles. I think, however, it is naive of us to think that social media is a magic bullet to youth organizing in the Caribbean. In recent elections in Barbados and Trinidad and Tobago, significant headlines read, "Social media to determine election." This bright-eyed view of the platform overlooks the lack of information many social media administrators have, the mismatch between social media and the complexity of society and political solutions, the harsh reality that social media does not often encourage long-term thinking, the lack of representation in online forums such as national consultations, and ultimately the lack of critical mass that persons in power listen to. Some organizations complain about the lack of youth participation. Some youth want to go hard, get out there and do groundwork. And several established organizations have committed themselves out to inaction, and they do not attract us. We continually search for groups that fit our integrity and form new ones when we cannot find any that do. Social media groups is a great facility that organizes us in feedback forums where events, posts, and artwork can be shared to audiences where advertising is too expensive to afford in traditional media, or the sizes of networks we reach may be impossible to create in one lifetime. However, a false sense of power on social media and arrogance by page administrators may give an illusion of democratic power and impact. Sitting around some planning committees for groups, I have listened to persons with more hopes to go viral than express their commitment to social organizing and seek long-term change. No number of Facebook and Twitter posts and shares or retweets substitute for letters to the editor and face-to-face engagements that challenge public opinion. In my experience, politicians respond more quickly to bad press than social media hashtags in the Caribbean. Creating a collectivism in the Caribbean based on social media presence and democratic participation, which is more than social media visibility and likability, is a conversation worth having among youth organizers. Grounding social media democracy with the social situations of the people behind the computers is an imperative for strategizing ahead. One look to the south, we see the ugly face of political entrepreneurship in Brazil with news of campaign finance and corruption. Further up the road, the United States has made billion-dollar corporate clients of political parties, and the story of Donald Trump. Not too far away from here, the independent nation of St. Kitts and Nevis awaited decisions from the British Privy Council on electoral boundaries, then waited for the delayed results from the Electoral Commission after the general election. In our hemisphere, we learn that all democracies are a work in progress. Therefore, it is our duty in the Caribbean to ensure that we work for progress. Perhaps one of the most progressive efforts in the Caribbean youth organizing was the New Jewel movement in Grenada and its political proposals for the youths. In the manifesto of the NJM, they identified youth and students as workers who were either participating and practicing or potentially productive contributors to the economy. Thus, they deserve special attention in the development process. Perspectives such as these helped me shape my efforts as president of the student government at my university during 2011-2012, when we mobilized most of the tertiary education institutes of our country in a memorandum of understanding to establish a National Students' Union of Trinidad and Tobago. 1 year later, it would be incorporated as the Tertiary Students' Union of Trinidad and Tobago under the leadership of Mr. Jean-Luc Atwell. However, it was short-lived, too little cooperation between the campuses, the structure of the organization was not finalized, and a legacy of insularity and stupidity among student representatives. Freudian slip. Insularity and stupidity among student representatives with narrow political ambitions ended this effort. The best activism in the Caribbean espoused publicly the Caribbean consciousness. From radical movements on the left, the Caribbean Congress of Labour, Caribbean Conference of Churches, and youth who do amazing work in organizations such as the Caribbean Youth Environmental Network. As crazy as it sounds, if I never fell in love with a woman in Belize, Guyana, and Grenada, not simultaneously but sequentially. Yo, you like trouble? I may have been slimmer, but also possessed less talents in the kitchen. As a vegetarian, I would have only been limited to the culinary culture of Trinidad and Tobago, even though nothing compares to a good hot Trini doubles. Now I eat tortillas, corn flour dumpling, pico de gallo, one pot cook-ups with coconut milk, and oil down and butter bread when I'm not a Weight Watcher. A Caribbean consciousness allows us to tap into the multiple realities and island views of development by engaging experiences of people who share common agendas and have historical nuances which make us different. More importantly, making regional affairs, domestic affairs, is critical for advancing the Caribbean integration movement. For this reason, I commend the government of Trinidad and Tobago in 2015 for establishing a Ministry of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs. CARICOM citizens are not foreigners in the CARICOM. The youths in the Caribbean already are part of an informal movement of Caribbean peoples. As an example, we see this among churches and sporting groups of cultural activities when they compete and exchange during July and August holidays, in spite of the high cost of intra-Caribbean travel. On the 16th of April 2015, university students, artists, and poets gathered at a monthly open mic and student advocacy advocacy space called We Speak to make a call for our regional leaders to ascend to the Caribbean Court of Justice as the final appellate court. Students from St. Lucia, Jamaica, and messages of solidarity from Guyana and Barbados expressed that the imperative of the youths are oftentimes ahead of the mindset of our leaders and the social structures in place. Many students at the UWI advocate for a CCJ because they feel the stamp of injustice by immigration officers when they return to a new academic year in another CARICOM country for studies, and they have a stamp that permits them for 1 month entry. What I can tell you, tragically, is that on campuses where non-national populations are being decreased as a result of state directives to increase local populations in locally based universities, attendance at UWI does not guarantee you a youth with a regional mindset. Too often I hear at the campus level national rhetoric that finds itself on a regional platform, students and staff alike. On CNN and Fox News, we see how some persons use racism to prevent terrorism, and this is counterproductive as it is oppressive. Likewise, in the Caribbean, we use xenophobia to prevent illegal immigration, but this leads us into a descent of selfish nationalism against the broader Caribbean integration project. Hopefully, Tropical Storm Erica does not only unite us in crisis, as seen with the devastation, death, and destruction left behind. I pray for our eternal unity and purpose. I commend the work of the University of the West Indies Open Campus and the success of the Youth Development Certificate Program. Thankfully, we now have the degree program, which allows for a wider selection of courses that widen the analysis of sociological conditions that afflict youth. I am, however, concerned about the social work emphasis, the social work-oriented youth development studies that has become the norm. And while it ignores the study of youths in the Caribbean as a distinct field of knowledge, I am cautiously optimistic of youth development training that equips practitioners to work and help youth and not emphasize a theoretical and political lens that allows them to critique the society and how it structurally oppresses youth on its own terms. The youth studies I propose here does not examine the conditions upon which youth are discriminated because of their age alone, but it also develops critical perspectives on the youths who occupy social identities of privilege, who are powerless, and why. Something to which we have merely given lip service to, but continues to plague our analysis of youth in the Caribbean, is treating the youth as a homogeneous group, and for this reason, our issues, politics, and broad aims are compiled in a tasteless cocktail of watered-down political expressions called youth issues. We need to harness the concerns and political expressions of our marginal and proliferated youth in an uneasy and unpolished way, even if their articulations aren't that clear, even if it may appear to hurt our sensibilities of sophistication, which we were taught to possess and practice in formal training. We must account for the differences in nationalities, ethnicity, class, sexual identities, gender, religion, abilities. While the oppression, suffocation, and subordination of youth may possess some characteristics that can be interpreted universally, Caribbean youth politics must consistently reject the universality of our situation, promote the diversity of youth conditions and aspirations, and therefore articulate radically different responses to different needs of our youth based on our power to define our own problems and determine our destiny. Our youth banner should be more unitary than totalizing. What we have in common is our encounters with adultism and hierarchical structures that undermine our talents. Your respect? In the early nation-building efforts of the Caribbean, discipline, respectability politics, and a high value for formal education shaped the consciousness of our newly independent nations laced with colonial tradition. In Trinidad and Tobago, notions of discipline and discipline of the youths can be found in our pledge, where we affirm, I will honor my teachers, my elders, my leaders, and those in authority. Similarly, our first Prime Minister, Eric Williams, invested in his belief that the future of the nation was in the book bags of the children. To the state's credit, this helped shape the nation on some positive attributes. On the contrary, it did not refrain from valuing certain youth bodies and identities with unequal cultural and political significance. More and more, we have emerging the entrepreneurial ideal founded on the neoliberal adoption of Caribbean governments that meets the mandate of capitalism more than the dignity of human beings. Our charge is to develop a critical youth studies that disrupts the status quo, burn out the oppression, and build up perspectives and possibilities that radically reconstitutes Caribbean society in our social, economic, cultural, and political institutions and mode in everyday life. Everyday life will constitute our negotiations of the self, our experiences in an economy that values profit over care, negotiations in political parties that instill more fear than a sense of family as youths that can be likened to walking a tightrope, our psychological health in the age of the internet, stigma and challenges accessing mental health care, gang violence in schools, a mix of sexism and camera phone technology that puts young girls in situations of revenge porn, homophobia that makes our boys unnecessarily violent to others and themselves, our connectedness to the environment and the responses to a changing climate, the freedom we wish to have accessing public transport, and our safety in that ride. This is what I refer to when I say our mode in everyday life. In no way I suggest that there's not enough scholarship on youth in the Caribbean. In fact, my assertion is that there is in research fields of education, food and nutrition, sociology, social work, and demographic data, for example. What I contend is that there has been a displacement of youth bodies in Caribbean scholarship. In my mind, when I think about the scholarship on youth, if I am to take pictures of all that was produced, including the scholars, I could not see people, I could not see young people, and I could not even see myself. For this reason, I think youths in the Caribbean are required to carve out dimensions of this room of knowledge and power into thinking about our conditions and us. We will risk the harassment of cynics who consider us parochial and tunnel vision in our analysis. However, we will persistently express our right as a group to explore the particularities and nuances of our identity, our experience, and everyday life. We have yet to begin to think about youths from the self-conscious self. In the Caribbean to date, in every youth conference, every policy chat shop, every youth advocacy effort, and every youth group, we lack a coherent, explicit, and accessible language of analysis to explain our oppression, power relations, and social situation of youths. We need to develop youth studies with the focus of the studies being in and out of the classroom to give us a lens to see in the world, to think about the world, the way it is organized and structured. This lens will reveal to us how every belief we hold is a politics of justice. So let's take this opportunity to define what a youth studies I envision it to be. We can define a youth studies as a theoretical perspective that explores the exclusion and/or restrictions to equal participation in political, cultural, economic, and social life because social structures ignore, make small, or do not take into account the contributions of youth. Youth studies, therefore, makes connections between the study of youths and political action. These analyses deconstruct social, environmental, and attitudinal barriers that perpetuate the unequal distribution of resources, status, and power. It will view the condition of youth as being in a social relationship whereby the subjective and lived experiences of youth are produced by the interaction within a particular social context. In conclusion, at 26 years old, as I near the boundaries of youth by United Nations definitional standards, I can laugh to myself when I read the prolific writer and socialist scholar George Bernard Shaw. Youth is a wonderful thing, but a crime to waste it on children. I am grateful for the organizers of this event who have invited me to be a plenary speaker. The word plenary is one of those small, difficult words you think you understand until you figure that you are unable to define it yourself. It is with great gratitude I accept this invitation. I am a simple Rastaman from East Trinidad, a tutor at a university while I struggle to finish my studies. Dr. Gilbert Roberts' professionalism and cool vibes from sending me tweets to efficient correspondence by his staff, and namely Rachel Folks, all made this journey possible to Jamaica, a place with great cultural, spiritual, and familial significance. I honor the time you've taken to engage me. I too am a student of life. Once upon a time, to be a leader in the Caribbean, you had to be white. Once upon a time, you had to be a Christian. Once upon a time, you had to be upper class. Once upon a time, you had to be seasoned and experienced. Once upon a time. What is the new frontier for our Caribbean youths? What is that new frontier of freedom? In a world of expanding rights and ideas of justice, what future do you seek? Caribbean youths in every island, in every territory, in every metropolitan pole overseas are charged with engaging the Caribbean creative imagination, to which I refer to as the Caribbean imagination. The Caribbean imagination is a process and output of the creative consciousness that takes visions of the future and create them as facts of social life in the present. Tonight, I extend love, liberation, and solidarity to youths of the Caribbean and agents who seek our betterment, as I tell my students, young lions and lionesses, at the beginning of each academic year, the struggle for humanity in the Caribbean, in its most noble form, is based not on how good we look, not how proper they are, not how much respectability they hold, not how much they earn or the wellness of their pay, but because as a people, they are. Thank you.